The autumn air had a crispness that could only come from the season's final breath before winter settled in. The leaves had begun their slow, colorful descent from the towering trees surrounding my family's lake cabin, each one carrying a story of the years that had passed. I drove along the familiar winding road that led to the cabin, feeling a sense of nostalgia rising in my chest. This place was my sanctuary, the one retreat where I could escape the pressures of my everyday life. The world outside always seemed to move too quickly, too chaotically, but here, time slowed down. The lake shimmered peacefully in the distance, the water reflecting the orange and gold hues of the sky. This was the place where I could hear my thoughts without interruption. For generations, the cabin had been in my family's care. My father had passed it down to me after he retired, and I had spent many summers here with my siblings. The memories were endless. Swimming in the lake, sitting around the fire pit, talking about the future while gazing at the stars. It had been my haven for so long that I couldn't imagine anyone else encroaching on it. But lately, whispers had begun to swirl in the community. A woman named Linda, the president of the Homeowners Association, had been making more and more moves to expand her influence. And her latest plan was something I had been hearing about for weeks. She wanted to claim the lake cabin as part of her vision for the community. She'd been pushing for a new regulation that would allow the HOA to designate certain properties, like mine, for community use. It was her latest project, and something told me that my sanctuary was in her sights. The drive was longer than usual, the unease in my chest growing with every mile. The first hint that something was wrong came when I pulled up to the cabin and saw that the lock on the front door wasn't quite right. The mechanism didn't align the way it should, and the door opened with an unusual creak, one that sounded far too easy. It was the kind of sound you hear when someone has already been inside. I stepped cautiously over the threshold, taking in the familiar surroundings that had always brought me peace. The scent of wood and pine greeted me as I looked around, hoping to find things as they had always been. But something was off. The air felt heavier, almost oppressive, as though it were holding a secret. I walked further into the cabin, noting the untouched dust on the floor, the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the corner, and the empty fireplace. Yet, a tension lingered in the air, and then it hit me. The place wasn't just empty. It felt violated, as though someone had been here without permission. I could almost sense Linda's presence, her need to take control, to impose her vision on everything she deemed worthy of her attention. Linda had a history of doing this sort of thing. She had manipulated the HOA rules before, turning them to her advantage, but I had never imagined she would come after my family's property. I had heard about the new HOA regulation, of course, but I had never thought it would go this far. The more I thought about it, the more my suspicions grew. Linda wasn't just trying to create more communal spaces for the neighborhood. No, she was trying to take this cabin for herself, to turn it into something that would fit into her vision of what the community should be. Under the guise of public use, she wanted to control the lake cabin, dictate who could stay here, and turn it into something that was no longer mine. It was as if she believed the cabin should be hers, simply because she had the power to claim it. I had always known Linda had a certain ambition, a desire to shape everything around her. But this felt personal. I had spent years of my life here, and I wasn't about to let her take it from me without a fight. That's when I remembered the precautions I had taken, the traps I had set. It wasn't something I had done lightly, but I had been anticipating a day like this. Linda had no idea what she was walking into. I had spent months preparing for this moment. It wasn't just a simple matter of locking the door and hoping for the best. No, I had studied every possible way she might try to gain access to the cabin. Every inch of the place was rigged with mechanisms designed to stop someone from easily taking what wasn't theirs. A series of carefully planned traps, each one designed to be harmless but terrifying, waited for the moment they would spring into action. It was a foolproof plan, one that would teach Linda a lesson she would never forget. The first trap was in the door. It was a simple mechanism, a spring-loaded system that would trigger a harmless but jarring shock of electricity to the door, handle if it were tampered with. It was enough to make anyone think twice before entering, but Linda wasn't the type to back down easily. I could already imagine her determination, her desire to impose her will. She'd probably try to brute force her way through the door, thinking she could simply overpower any obstacle I put in her way. But what she didn't know was that I was ready. Every trap I had set was designed with precision, each one to give her a moment of doubt, a second of hesitation. I moved through the cabin, making sure everything was in place. The second trap was in the living room, where I had rigged the couch, cushions to spring up at the slightest movement, sending a loud bang that would rattle anyone inside. Then there was the motion-sensing camera system, a hidden network of tiny lenses that captured every inch of the cabin, each one sending a signal to my phone. I wanted to be sure I knew exactly what was happening, even if I wasn't there in person. I wasn't the kind of person who liked confrontation, but when someone tries to take what's rightfully yours, there's no choice but to fight back. I was ready. As much as I hated the idea of going head-to-head with Linda, there was no way I was going to let her have the cabin. It had been in my family for too long, and the thought of it being turned into some sort of community project was unbearable. But what struck me most was the audacity of it all. Linda had no regard for what this cabin meant to me, to my family. It wasn't just a property. It was a piece of history, a place where I had grown up, where I had memories with my father, my siblings, and countless others. To her, it was just another property to add to her growing list of things to control. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about a cabin or a property line. This was about boundaries, about respect. Linda didn't understand that. She thought she could take anything she wanted, that her power within the HOA gave her the right to impose her will on everyone around her. But I was about to show her just how wrong she was. I stood in the center of the cabin, taking one last look at the place before I made my next move. The smell of pine, the crackling of the fireplace, the sound of the lake water gently lapping against the shore. It all felt like home. And I wasn't going to let Linda take that from me. Not without a fight. The next day, I knew she would come. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Linda would arrive, thinking she had everything under control, ready to claim what wasn't hers. And when she did, she would find herself caught in a web of her own making, a web of traps that would stop her in her tracks and make her realize that some things, no matter how much power you have, cannot be taken. The doorbell rang. It was time. The cabin felt unusually still, almost suffocating as I stepped inside. My pulse quickened when I saw her, the last person I expected to find in my sanctuary, sitting in my favorite chair by the fireplace, her back straight and her posture regal, as if the cabin were already hers. Linda, the president of the HOA. She had a look of quiet satisfaction on her face, one that betrayed her belief that she had already won. As if she'd already claimed the lake cabin as a communal property. She didn't look at me immediately, savoring the wine in her hand, swirling it idly, no doubt savoring her victory. The moment I entered, she turned her head, her smile so practiced that I could hardly believe it. It was a smile that was too forced, too rehearsed, like one someone gives when they've already calculated every possible outcome and have concluded they've already won. "It's a nice place you have here," she said, the words rolling off her tongue with an air of condescension. "But it's just not meant to be used only by one person, you know. The HOA board has decided it should be a communal space." The words hit me like a slap in the face. She had come here with an agenda, of course. An agenda that included the complete disregard for the value of my family's cabin. To her, It was nothing more than a piece of property she could control, manipulate, and turn into whatever fit her ever-expanding vision of a communal community. A place that was supposed to be a sanctuary had become the subject of her latest power play. She thought that her position with the HOA gave her the right to decide who had access to what. But she didn't know how much I had prepared for this moment. The cabin, with its rich history of laughter and quiet solitude, had never been meant to be shared. It was a family legacy, one that connected me to the past in ways she could never understand. And yet, she sat there as if it had been handed to her by some divine right. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. It was hard to stay composed, but I had to. My plan wasn't to confront her immediately, to lash out with my anger. It had to be done carefully. She had no idea what I had waiting for her. The traps I had set weren't designed to harm anyone. They were meant to make her understand that there were consequences to stepping out of line. I kept my voice steady. I didn't realize the HOA had such an interest in my private property. I thought you were more concerned with things like lawn maintenance and community events. I let the sarcasm hang in the air, knowing that Linda would be just the right target for my subtle jabs. Her smile never wavered, but there was a flicker in her eyes. Well, when we have the chance to make things better for everyone, we take it. She tilted her head, looking at me with a self-satisfied expression. She truly believed she had the upper hand. I didn't respond, choosing instead to turn and make my way down the hallway toward the back of the cabin. Linda's gaze followed me as I walked, her eyes scanning the room, no doubt trying to gauge how much she could manipulate, how much control she could exert. She probably thought she had everything figured out. Little did she know she was stepping into a web of my design, a web meant not to harm, but to make her realize just how out of touch she was. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard the faintest sound, the soft click of a mechanism being triggered. It was the first trap. A series of sensors along the hallway, connected to the door handle and the lights above, had just gone live. She hadn't noticed. I had rigged the place carefully, making sure everything would function as planned. The hallway was long and narrow, dimly lit by the soft glow of wall sconces. But as soon as I moved under the first light fixture, a faint click sounded above me, and I knew that it had begun. The bulb overhead exploded with a sharp crack, sending a spray of sparks in every direction. It wasn't dangerous, but the effect was immediate. The lights above flickered, then popped like firecrackers. The suddenness of it caused Linda to jump from her seat, her glass of wine nearly spilling over the armrest. I couldn't help but smile inside as I heard her gasp in shock. She stood there for a moment, trying to regain her composure, her breath catching in her throat. The wine glass was still trembling in her hand. This was just the beginning. The harmless scare was enough to throw her off, to show her that nothing in the cabin was as it seemed. I had planned each of these traps to be just enough to unsettle her without crossing the line into danger. After all, I wasn't looking to harm her. I just wanted to make a point. Linda quickly turned back toward me, her face flushed with surprise. Her eyes were no longer calm, no longer composed. The facade she had worn so well just moments ago was now slipping, revealing the tension underneath. But even as she composed herself, I could tell she wasn't ready to back down. No, Linda had never been one to retreat. She would fight back. I could already see the wheels turning in her head, plotting her next move. But that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted her to think she could regain control. I wanted her to believe that this cabin, this place she had no right to, was still something she could manipulate. I wanted her to fall deeper into my traps. I turned toward the kitchen, pretending to be nonchalant. In truth, my heart was pounding. This was all going according to plan. The second trap was already set in motion. The motion sensors along the floor were rigged to trigger an audible alarm if anyone stepped over them. And there was one final trap in the back room. It would be the grand finale, the trap that would make Linda realize the full extent of what she had done. As I moved to the back of the cabin, I glanced over my shoulder at Linda. She was standing by the fireplace now, her eyes narrow and calculating. The shock from the lights had worn off, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she gripped the edge of the mantel. She wasn't giving up, not yet. She wouldn't, and that was exactly what I needed. The second trap went off as planned. As I entered the kitchen, I triggered the motion sensors beneath the countertop. The sound of a loud bang echoed throughout the room, making Linda jump. A stream of compressed air shot out from a hidden vent beneath the kitchen sink, sending a paper towel roll flying off the counter with a deafening pop. The sudden noise was enough to make her eyes widen in fear. She whipped her head around, trying to figure out what was happening. Her breathing became shallow as her composure continued to slip. I stepped further into the kitchen, pretending to be unfazed by the noise. I had to stay calm. I had to show her that I was in control. And yet inside, a small part of me felt satisfaction with every jolt she took. This was her consequence. This was my lesson to her. Linda's voice came, shaky and incredulous. "What are you doing? This is insane. You can't—" I cut her off, my voice steady but firm. "You came here, trying to take what wasn't yours. You didn't ask. You didn't care about what this place meant to me, to my family. So, now you'll learn what happens when someone oversteps their bounds." She looked as if she wanted to argue, but the fear was evident in her eyes now. She hadn't expected this. And that was the point. She had underestimated me, underestimated what I was capable of. She thought she could simply walk in and take control, but she had no idea what I had set up. She was walking into a trap, and now she was caught in the web of her own making. But the real trap, the one that would make her realize her mistake, was still to come. The final piece of the puzzle. It would be the one that would turn her from the conqueror into the conquered. The last trap had been set into motion, and there was no turning back. The tension in the cabin had reached its peak, the silence so thick that I could almost hear the sound of Linda's own heartbeat as she stood in front of me. The anger and fear that had been boiling beneath her controlled exterior now bubbled to the surface. Her eyes darted around, trying to find an escape, but she quickly realized that her path had been blocked. As the door slammed shut behind her with a sound so final, it echoed through the room like the judgment of a gavel. The old wooden frame groaned under the weight of the storm brewing in her chest, and for the first time since I'd seen her walk in, Linda was truly caught. Her expression twisted from one of confidence to something far more primal, panic. "What's the matter, Linda?" I asked, my voice calm, but unmistakably firm. There was no anger in my tone, no maliciousness, just the cold, undeniable truth that she had made a grave mistake. "Did you really think you could just take what wasn't yours?" Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment she froze. I could see her mind racing as she tried to figure out how to regain control. She had been so sure that she could simply walk in and claim this place as her own, that the cabin, this family legacy, was just another piece in her growing collection of HOA properties. But now, with the door shut behind her, and all of my carefully planned traps still set into motion, she realized the extent of her miscalculation. Linda took a step back, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden floor as she assessed her surroundings. Her eyes shifted to the corners of the room, searching for an escape, a way out. But there was none. The windows were locked, the door was sealed, and everything around her seemed to close in. She had thought herself untouchable, and now she was trapped, not by the cabin itself, but by her own overconfidence. "You've made a mistake," I said, watching as she shifted uneasily from one foot to the other. "You didn't think this through, did you? You thought you could just walk in here, claim what wasn't yours, and leave without consequences." Linda's gaze faltered for a moment, and I could see her frustration building. "You can't keep me here," she spat, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "I'll have you thrown out. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The words hit me like a gust of wind, but I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, allowing the silence to stretch between us. I wasn't worried about her threats. This was no longer about power or control. It was about making her understand that there were lines you don't cross. The cabin wasn't just some property to be controlled or taken. It was a piece of my history, my heritage, something that couldn't be manipulated by someone like her. She made another attempt to move toward the door, her hand reaching for the handle, but it was already too late. The final trap had been set, and she was walking straight into it. I watched with calculated detachment as she tried the door handle, then tugged on it again, this time with more force. Nothing. The door refused to budge just as I had planned. Linda was stuck, and the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She whipped her head around, her breath coming in shallow gasps, eyes darting around the room, looking for any way out. But there was no escape. The cabin had become a cage, and she was its unwilling prisoner. I took a step forward, slowly, carefully, as if savoring the moment. This was the final lesson, the one that would teach her what happens when you overstep your boundaries. "Linda," I said, my voice unwavering, "you thought you could just take what wasn't yours, but you didn't think about the consequences. You didn't think about what would happen when you tried to control something that was never meant to be controlled." She turned to face me, her expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You think this is over?" she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. "You think you've won? You'll pay for this. You can't do this to me." But there was something in her eyes now, something that told me she was beginning to understand. It wasn't just the surprise at finding herself trapped in a place she had so boldly attempted to conquer. It was the realization that all her power, all her threats, meant nothing in this moment. She had no power here. I let the silence linger, letting her stew in her anger, her fear, her frustration. She had tried to take something that wasn't hers, and now she was paying the price. I wasn't going to hurt her. That was never the goal. But she needed to learn that some things can't be taken or manipulated. Not everything was for sale. Not everything could be controlled by someone like her. Linda finally seemed to deflate, her posture slumping slightly as she gave up her futile attempts to escape. Her gaze fell to the floor, and for the first time since she entered, she seemed to be processing what had just happened. The door, the traps, the sudden shift in power, all of it had been too much. She wasn't in control anymore. She hadn't been for a while. I didn't have to say anything else. Linda knew the game was up. She knew she had lost. "You can go now," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. "But understand this. You will never take what isn't yours. Not again." She didn't say anything, didn't try to argue. Instead, she slowly walked toward the door, now desperate to leave. Her hand hovered over the handle for a moment before she finally turned it. The door creaked open with an eerie finality. She stepped out into the world that she thought she controlled, but there was no mistaking the defeat in her posture, the way her shoulders slumped under the weight of her failure. I watched her leave. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, not because I had won, but because I had made her understand the importance of respecting boundaries. She would never try to take what wasn't hers again. Not here. Not in my cabin. The lesson had been taught, and I had no doubt that she would remember it for the rest of her life. The cabin was mine once more. But more than that, it had been protected, not by force, but by the careful, deliberate actions of someone who understood the value of what was truly important. The legacy of my family, the memories that lived within these walls, were safe. And as I stood there, watching the door close behind Linda, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The job was done. The lesson had been taught. And Linda? She would. Never dare to interfere again. Don't miss out on more thrilling stories. Subscribe to the HOA Stories for the latest drama and jaw-dropping tales.